Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where the air is thick with smoke and the constant clang of hammer on metal never truly fades. Imagine your hands cracked and bleeding before the sun's even risen, and every breath tastes like hot coal and burnt iron. This is the harsh and gritty reality of a medieval locksmith. Not some polished craftsman wielding master keys with ease, but someone locked in a daily struggle against stubborn iron, cruel fires, and the weight of endless, mind-numbing repetition. You'd spend your days bending and shaping metal, chasing perfection in tiny tumblers and wards that decide whether a door stays shut or swings open. And if one little piece slipped, well, that could mean a locked treasure lost forever, or a client's wrath hotter than the forge. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights, light a candle if you've got one, or just let the gentle glow of your screen pull you in. Close your eyes, and slowly let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. Before the medieval locksmith existed, before keys jangled from a noble's belt, before doors groaned under the weight of bolts and bars, there was mostly nothing. No locks. Not really. Just wood, rope, and hope. It's easy to forget, in our world of deadbolts and passwords, that for much of early human history, security was more about muscle than mechanism. If you wanted to keep someone out, you put a bigger person in front of the door, or a dog, or a stick wedged against the handle. But locks? Real locks? That was a rare and precious thing. The Romans had them, of course. They had everything. They were the first to turn locks into art. They made padlocks out of iron and bronze, and keys that curled like snails or looked like miniature spoons. They even invented warded locks, the same basic principle behind your grandmother's chest of drawers. And Roman keys weren't just tools. They were jewelry, status symbols. Some women wore them as rings to show that they managed a household. But when Rome fell, its metalwork went with it. The collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century didn't just leave crumbling roads and broken aqueducts. It left a vacuum of skill. Lockmaking was one of the many casualties. In the chaos of early medieval Europe, forging iron was still a thing. But precision metalwork? Fine mechanics? Not so much. Blacksmiths were busy shoeing horses, fixing plows, and hammering out swords for whatever warlord was chopping through the next village. Making a clever little latch wasn't high on the to-do list. And besides, why would anyone bother? There wasn't much to steal. Peasants owned very little. A family might have a few tools, a pot or two, and some rough-spun clothing. Food was eaten quickly, or spoiled. The idea of locking up your belongings made no sense when you slept in the same room as your goats and your spoons. Even the houses themselves didn't lend well to locking. Early medieval homes were made of mud, wattle, and straw. Doors were rudimentary or non-existent, more like shutters than anything resembling modern architecture. If someone wanted in, they didn't pick a lock, they kicked the wall. So instead of locks, people relied on social norms, kinship, and threat of violence. If you lived in a village of 100 people and someone stole from you, you likely knew who did it. Justice was informal, sometimes brutal. The fear of being caught and beaten was a stronger deterrent than a key ever could be. In that sense, communities were their own locks, tight-knit and suspicious. But that doesn't mean people didn't try. Some rudimentary locking mechanisms existed. Think wooden latches, simple iron bars, or doors tied shut with cord. Occasionally, a wealthy person might have a blacksmith craft a basic mechanism. Something with a turning key and a bolt. But these were rare and expensive, often unreliable. The other challenge? No standardization. Every early lock was handmade. There were no templates, no key sizes. You couldn't go to a store and buy a replacement. If your key broke or got lost, you were often out of luck. Or worse, locked out of your own grain box until someone came to break it open. This created a strange irony. Locks were status symbols, but they often didn't work very well. They jammed, rusted, froze shut. A determined thief with a rock or an axe could break most of them easily, but if you had a lock, it showed that you had something worth stealing, or that you at least wanted to look like you did. The real boom in lock usage wouldn't come until towns began to rise, slowly, unevenly, in the 11th and 12th centuries. As trade returned and markets formed, people began to own things that couldn't be replaced. Goods, money, letters, titles, documents. That's when locks began to matter. That's when locksmiths, as a specialized trade, began to appear. But even then, the early medieval period remained a world more about brute force than clever security. Doors were barricaded with beams across them, not keyholes. Boxes were buried in floorboards, not fastened shut. If a chest needed guarding, a family member would sit on it. And if a merchant traveled, he brought guards, not locks. One early medieval traveler, a monk, described how monasteries stored their treasures in hidden compartments or chained to the wall rather than locked in a box. And some castles kept their coins in plain sight. Not because it was safe, but because anyone who tried to steal them would be skewered by a guard within seconds. Locksmithing in this early stage was more curiosity than necessity. Something nobles might request, monks might ponder, but ordinary people had no use for. And so, for hundreds of years after Rome, the lock was a half-forgotten whisper, a luxury, a gamble, a symbol, not yet a profession. That would change, painfully and slowly, in the centuries to come. As towns grew and trade flourished, so did crime. Pickpockets, burglars, and highwaymen began to appear. The more people gathered, the more reason there was to lock things up. Doors, chests, cabinets, archives. And with that need came opportunity. The blacksmith who once made horseshoes and nails would now be asked to make locks, at first simple, then ornate, then complex. Eventually so complex that a new kind of smith had to be born, the locksmith. But that wasn't a glamorous job. It wasn't respected. It wasn't well paid. And for the first few centuries of its existence, it absolutely sucked. The locksmith was blamed when a lock failed, suspected when a lock worked too well, stuck in a smoky forge with no real protection, and constantly walking the line between craft and crime. He was a mechanic, a servant, and sometimes an accomplice, all wrapped in soot and suspicion. Now, let's say you've just been apprenticed to a blacksmith. Not because you have a passion for the craft, not because you dream of hammering iron into beautiful shapes under a golden medieval sun. No, it's because your uncle owed a favor, and the town smith needed someone with more fingers than teeth. And here you are, your first day on the job, a masterpiece of medieval onboarding. You're handed a broom that's older than the king and told to sweep the hearth. You don't know what that means. You try sweeping the fire. You are screamed at for sweeping the fire. Lesson 1. Forge terminology is not self-explanatory, and everything burns you, including your boss. The forge itself is a charming little hellhole. It's hotter than sin, noisier than a tavern during Harvest Festival, and smells like roasted pig feet dipped in old ale. Your eyes water from the smoke. Your lungs fill with iron dust. And your eyebrows? Gone by lunch. Your master, a man known only as Hob the Iron Gut, communicates exclusively in grunts, insults, and the occasional boot to the ribs when you're in the way. He is exactly as patient as a charging boar, and about as hygienic. Hob is what you'd call experienced, meaning he's got arthritis, 3 missing fingers, and a face that looks like it lost a drinking contest with a fire poker. Your official title is apprentice, but your job description reads more like sweeper, coal fetcher, bellows pumper, scald recipient, and occasional scapegoat. You work from before the rooster crows until well after the rooster has reconsidered its life choices. Your meals are taken standing up, your fingers are permanently black, and you've been peed on by at least 2 cats who live under the anvil and answer to no god. And then one day, between stoking the fire and failing to not trip over the tongs again, you notice something odd on the shelf. A small collection of twisted iron shapes, each with tiny teeth and jagged bits. They're not tools, they're not weapons, they're keys. At least you think they are. They look like tortured hairpins for trolls. You pick one up. It's heavy, crude, and slightly greasy from whatever Hob uses as hand balm. Spoiler, it's mutton fat. Put that down before you break it, maggot, Hob growls. Which, to be fair, is how he greets everyone, including the priest. You put the key down, but it haunts you. That little chunk of metal didn't just open something. It prevented something. A lock, a door, a chest, a secret. It wasn't just iron. It was power. Now, don't get ahead of yourself. You're not about to become some master of medieval espionage. You still sleep in a pile of ragged cloth in the corner of the forge, nestled between a bag of coal and an anvil that definitely fell on your foot last Tuesday. No, it's not broken. That's just how toes look now. But over time, you start to notice things. Keys, locks, iron bands on cellar doors, bolted storage chests, the local Reeves coin box, which never quite closes right, the drunk monk's wine cupboard, secured with something that looks like a bent spoon. And eventually, Hob, reluctantly, angrily, probably by accident, lets you try making one. It's a disaster. Your first attempt at a lock looks like someone fed a horseshoe to a sick goat and then tried to reassemble the pieces using only blind optimism and bad dreams. It jams. It sticks. It squeals when turned. Hob says it's an insult to iron and makes you wear it on a rope around your neck, like a punishment medallion. The town boys call it the idiot's collar. But you keep at it. because you've realized something that nobody in your town seems to understand. Locks are mysterious. They're rare. They're expensive. Most people still use wooden latches, tied ropes, or sheer faith to keep their possessions safe. But those who can afford a lock, they love the feeling, the illusion that iron will keep thieves and fate at bay. You don't say this out loud, of course. You don't wax poetic about symbolic protection and security in the dark ages. You just keep your head down, file some teeth into a crooked key, and try not to drop anything into the forge again. The smell of burnt shoe is still lingering from last week. Eventually, Hob stops hitting you quite so often. He even lets you design the clasp on a merchant's chest. A small victory. The lock works, mostly. And the merchant even pays, mostly. You earn your first copper coin. You use it to buy bread and a second-hand pair of gloves. They don't fit, but now your burns are at least evenly distributed. This is your life now, sweating beside the coals, listening to metal scream under hammer, sleeping 4 hours a night and dreaming of gear teeth. You're still an apprentice, still covered in ash, still the last to eat and the first to bleed. But now, you have a secret. You're not just a blacksmith anymore. You're a locksmith in training. Which means someday, when the town's richest idiot needs a door no one else can open, they'll come to you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll make something that no thief, no noble, not even Hob the Iron Gut can break. Until then, you've got soot in your soup, iron splinters in your thumbs, and a key-shaped bruise on your shin. Welcome to the forge, fool. It only gets worse from here. You've just completed your first real lock. It's a beast, an iron monstrosity, the size of a dinner plate, with a key that could double as a cudgel. It clanks, groans, and occasionally jams, but it's yours. You forged every piece by hand, using tools like picks, tension wrenches, and key extractors crafted from iron, bronze, and brass for durability and functionality. Your client? The local lord who wants to secure his wine cellar. He's a man of refined tastes and questionable temper, with a fondness for Bordeaux and a tendency to blame others for his own missteps. You install the lock, demonstrate its use, and even provide a spare key, just in case. A week later, disaster strikes. The wine cellar has been broken into, barrels tapped, and the Lord's prized vintages pilfered. The culprit? According to the Lord, it's you. After all, you made the lock, didn't you? You protest, explaining that the lock was intact, no signs of forced entry. But the Lord isn't interested in logic. He wants someone to blame, and you're the easiest target. You're summoned to the manor where the Lord berates you in front of his assembled household. Your lock was supposed to be secure, he roars. And yet, my wine is gone. Explain yourself. You try to reason with him, suggesting that perhaps someone with a key, like his steward or the butler, might be responsible. But the Lord isn't listening. He's already decided that you're at fault. The punishment? A hefty fine and a public apology. You're forced to stand in the village square, holding a sign that reads, "I failed to secure the Lord's wine." The townsfolk snicker as they pass by, and you feel the weight of humiliation pressing down on you. Back at your workshop, you stew in your own frustration. You know the lock wasn't at fault. It was a solid design, crafted with care. But in the eyes of the nobility, a craftsman is only as good as his last commission. And when things go wrong, it's always the craftsman who takes the fall. Determined to clear your name, you begin investigating. You question the household staff, examine the lock for tampering, and even consult with other locksmiths in the guild. You learn that medieval locksmiths often faced challenges in making their tools, as guild regulations established strict standards to maintain quality and protect trade secrets. Your investigation leads you to the steward, a man with a known gambling problem and a sudden influx of coin. You present your findings to the Lord, who begrudgingly admits that perhaps you weren't at fault after all. But the damage is done. Your reputation has taken a hit, and commissions are scarce. You spend your days repairing broken locks and crafting simple latches, far removed from the prestigious commissions you once enjoyed. Still, you persevere. You refine your techniques, study new designs, and experiment with different materials. You learn about the use of warded locks, which employ a set of obstructions to prevent the lock from opening unless the correct key is inserted. Over time, your skills improve, and your reputation begins to recover. You take on apprentices, passing down your knowledge and ensuring that the next generation of locksmiths is better prepared for the challenges of the trade. But you never forget that first commission, the lock that worked perfectly and yet still led to your public shaming. It serves as a constant reminder that in the world of medieval locksmithing, success is fleeting and blame is always just around the corner. So, you keep your head down, your tools sharp, and your locks even sharper. Because in this line of work, it's not just about keeping others out. It's about keeping yourself in the clear. In the cold, soot-stained workshop tucked behind the butcher's lane, the blackened anvil rang out again and again, metal striking metal, not with the rhythm of art, but of obligation. The locksmith wiped sweat from his eyes, which burned from the acrid smoke of his forge. Outside, the town bell tolled to mark the hour of execution, but he did not flinch. He had heard it too many times. In truth, he had helped it ring. You see, the locksmith in a medieval town didn't just make locks for doors and chests. No, his work reached into darker corners, places without windows, rooms underground, torture chambers, gallows, dungeons that reeked of rot and fear. And whether he liked it or not, whether he flinched at the commission or not, the lockmaker had a role to play in death. When a man was shackled to the wall, someone had to make the iron cuffs. When a woman was accused of heresy, someone had to secure the iron mask over her face. When a thief was thrown into the pillory, someone had to craft the hinges that clicked shut with a final, echoing snap. Locks were needed for these too, and someone, always someone, had to make them. Most people imagine locksmiths as clever tinkerers, solving little puzzles and slipping keys into tiny keyholes. But in truth, medieval locksmithing was brutal work, and nowhere was that brutality clearer than in the devices made for suffering. Take the Iron Maiden, for example. No, not the mythologized version of the 19th century exhibit, but its cruel precursors, the standing coffins of spiked punishment. These devices needed locks that would not open accidentally. The mechanism had to be firm, final, irreversible. The hinges had to support the weight of heavy doors lined with spikes. If the lock jammed mid-torture, the executioner would turn his fury on the craftsman. It had to function perfectly. even if that meant driving steel into soft flesh. Then there were the shackles. Wrist irons, ankle restraints, collar clamps, all made in sets, all sized for the human body, all secured with locks. Each was tailored to fit tightly, with just enough space for a person to stay alive inside it, but not enough to breathe comfortably. A good shackle was a quiet torment, not a theatrical one. The locksmith had to measure carefully, file carefully, test the key, test the lock, test the hinge, not for freedom, but for permanence. Many of these locks were crude, thick pins, sliding bolts, and wedge-shaped teeth that groaned when they closed. But some were more sophisticated, hidden keyholes, spring-loaded catches, dual mechanism traps. Inquisitors were fond of complexity. They believed the devil thrived in mystery, and so they wanted their devices just as cunning. A chastity belt wasn't just a belt. It was a riddle of hinges, clasps, and small, intentionally finicky locks. And who better to solve it than the locksmith who made it? There was no room for conscience in this trade. Or if there was, it had to be locked away tightly. Refuse a commission for shackles, and you'd be labeled a sympathizer, or worse, a heretic. And heretics found themselves on the wrong end of the very devices they refused to make. Better to keep your head down, your hammer hot, and your tongue still. Sometimes the locksmith was even asked to be present during the use of his creation. After all, who else could unlock the mask if the torture needed to stop? Who else could guarantee the spring-loaded collar wouldn't snap too soon? On more than one occasion, a locksmith stood silently in the corner of a chamber that smelled of blood and smoke, holding the one key that could end or extend a man's pain. It was a strange, silent power, and it came at a cost. Word spread fast in medieval towns. If your hands made torture tools, the baker knew it. The butcher's wife whispered it. The children stared when you walked past. Some locksmiths bore it as a badge of survival. Others crumbled under the weight of guilt. But work was work. And iron didn't care what shape it took. Even when the torture ended, the locksmith's duty lingered. Devices had to be repaired. Hinges wore down. Locks rusted. Chains snapped. And heaven help you if they snapped at the wrong time. Maintaining instruments of suffering became a grim kind of routine, like oiling a door hinge, except the door led to agony. And then there were the gallows. You might think no locksmith would be needed there, but some executions required trapdoors that latched from below. Some had manacles attached to beams, or boxes locked tight around the prisoner's neck. Some cities even installed iron rings with locking mechanisms into public squares, so offenders could be chained in place for all to see. Temporary prisons, made permanent with a single twist of the key. The work was neither celebrated nor remembered. You wouldn't find a locksmith's name etched into the stocks. No plaque adorned the dungeon door with the phrase, "Locks by Master Edric." His work was invisible when done right, and unforgettable when done wrong. That was the burden. But still, he toiled, not because he loved pain, not because he believed in punishment, but because iron obeyed when nothing else did. In a chaotic world of lords and plagues and whispers of witchcraft, locks were the one thing that followed rules. One tooth turns another. One pin lifts the catch. One twist, and the job is done. Of course, Not every locksmith ended his days respected. Many died poor, some died hated, and a few, ironically, died chained in their own devices when fortune turned against them. But their legacy remains, not in books, not in songs, but in the quiet, cold click of a lock sealing shut in the dark. That, too, was part of the trade. You went home to your house, if you can even call it that, which is a one-room affair that serves as smithy, bedroom, and social life, all in one dimly lit, smoke-choked box. The walls are stone, damp with years of sweat and spilled ale. The floor is uneven. There's no chimney, so the smoke from your forge clings to everything you own, your rags, your bread, your lungs. And yes, your pillow is quite literally a hammer. You once tried stuffing some straw into a sack for cushioning, but the fleas unionized, and now they charge you rent. You sleep light because you have to. The tools you make, locks, keys, bolts, safes, and the occasional jail mechanism, are worth more than your own hide. That's because you, friend, are in the security business. Not that it makes you secure. Quite the opposite. The nobility needs you to keep their chests locked, their strong boxes sealed, their shameful letters secret. But they also don't trust you one bit. You see, everyone knows the only person who can truly crack a lock is the one who made it. So you're not just a craftsman, you're a suspect. Always. When someone's valuables go missing and the window wasn't smashed, guess who gets the first knock on the door? That's right. It's you. Sometimes they knock. Sometimes they bring rope. Still, you're good at what you do. Your tools are the finest in the borough. Little iron picks, tension rods, awls, hand-forged key blanks. You've got a whole wall of scary-looking instruments that could either unlock a treasure chest or gut a pig. You know every gear, ward, and spring inside a medieval lock. You understand tolerances like a monk understands sin. You also understand failure. See, medieval locks aren't precision instruments. There's no Swiss engineering here. They're noisy, clunky, and prone to jamming if someone sneezes near them. You build them from wrought iron, maybe some brass if you're lucky. Every mechanism has gaps, weaknesses, and you know them all. You have to. Because sometimes your clients forget to pay, and your only compensation is remembering how to break into their chests later. Today starts like most days. A sputtering fire, a breakfast of rock-hard bread soaked in something that might be beer or might be wood varnish. And then it's time to work. You stoke the forge. The bellows wheeze like a dying man. You throw in some charcoal and hope the smoke doesn't blind you again. A knock at the door. It's a merchant, reeking of nutmeg and fear. He's got a box. He wants a lock so good even God himself would struggle to open it. You nod sagely, scratch your beard, and quote him a price that includes hazard pay for having to smell him for more than 5 minutes. He grumbles, but you both know he'll pay. Merchants always do. They carry coin, and coin needs protection. Then a churchman walks in. This one wants a lock for a reliquary, something to keep peasants from pilfering bones of dubious authenticity. You make the sign of the cross, say something pious about Saint Lockus, who doesn't exist, and start sketching a design. The lock will be ornate, iron with a false keyhole to throw off simpletons. You'll install a hidden spring catch that only you can open. He'll call it divine. You'll call it Tuesday. Hours pass. You hammer, you file, You inhale more iron dust than is probably recommended. Your back aches. Your neck crunches like gravel. Your fingers are burned, cut, and blistered. But you keep going, because locks don't make themselves and the fire's not going to feed itself. Around mid-afternoon, a boy arrives, barefoot and pale. He brings a message. The constable wants to see you. This is rarely good news. You tuck a small pry bar into your sleeve, habit, and make your way to the town hall. The constable greets you like an old friend. You, being neither old nor friendly, wait. A noble's house was burgled last night, lock untouched, no forced entry, just missing gold. You made that lock 2 years ago. You remember it. Standard warded mechanism, nothing fancy, but enough to keep out the average drunk. They ask if you know how it could have been opened. You smile. You lie. Because the answer is yes. You do know. You've made a mental map of every flaw, every potential exploit, in every lock you've ever crafted. And if they think you're going to confess to designing something flawed, you'd rather eat nails, which, by the way, you sometimes do by accident when you're not paying attention. The constable squints at you. You squint back. There's an understanding. You're innocent, unless they need you not to be. You make it back to your smithy just before sunset. The fire has died. The coals are gray. You sit on your stool, pick a splinter from your hand, and sip the last of your vinegar ale. The forge crackles weakly beside you. You pull out your ledger, a dirty scrap of parchment with chicken scratch notes. Who owes you? Who underpaid you? Who threatened to have you hanged if you ever talked? It's a long list. You lay down on the floor, which is more soot than wood. Your hammer is beside you. You could sleep upstairs in a rented room, you suppose. But then you'd be further from your tools and closer to people. You choose the hammer. It's cold and hard and utterly dependable, unlike nobles or merchants or priests. The hammer has never betrayed you. The hammer doesn't care if your latest lock had a hairline flaw. The hammer just is. And as your eyes close and your breath slows, you dream of gears and springs and secret compartments. You dream of keys no one else can forge, locks no one else can open. In your dreams, you're not a suspect. You're a god of hinges and tumblers. Until morning, when the smoke returns and the fire demands to be fed, and someone else comes knocking, with coin, with suspicion, or with rope. Because being a locksmith in the Middle Ages meant sleeping with one eye open and a hammer for a pillow. Also, you are broke and cold, but you have a skill, and someone in town needs it. That someone is the village priest who has come to you with a peculiar request. He says it's for sacred relics, but you know better. He wants to lock up the communion wine so Brother Alric doesn't get into it again and start chanting the Psalms backward. You accept the job without hesitation. Not because you're devout, heaven forbid, but because the priest pays in bread, and your last proper meal was a turnip you found in the mud 2 days ago. Here's the challenge. It's the year 1037, and iron is expensive. Far too expensive for a man like you who hammers together locking mechanisms in a wooden shed that leaks smoke, rain, and your will to live. So you turn to what's available. Bone. Yes, actual bone. Cow bone, goat bone, or, if you're lucky, a piece of deer femur. Not because it holds some mystical property, but because it's free. Butchers toss it out. Hunters leave scraps. Your neighbor's dog is missing a leg, but you're not saying anything. Bone is lightweight and carvable. it's also brittle and completely unforgiving. Still, if you file it carefully and carve the right notches, you can create a passable key. Something small enough to open a box, but fragile enough to explode into splinters if you so much as sneeze on it. Then there's brass. You've just begun to work with it. It's the poor man's gold, the metal you use when you want something to look expensive without being truly valuable. You melt brass in your hearth, the same fire that heats your home, cooks your gruel, and occasionally attracts rats looking for warmth. You pour the molten brass into simple clay molds. These molds are cracked, scorched, and sometimes held together with spit and string. The result is a lumpy, uneven, slightly warped locking mechanism. But it functions, more or less. You scratch your mark onto the underside of the lock, a few crooked lines, because you can't write and your initials haven't been invented yet. The priest asks for the lock to be discreet. What he means is this: Brother Alric must not be able to find it, even in a drunken haze with a candle stub and 2 working brain cells. So, you devise your first hidden latch, a simple but clever mechanism embedded into a carved wooden chest. The chest itself is covered in saintly figures, writhing serpents, and a very unamused-looking Virgin Mary. You demonstrate how the lock works. Slide the panel left, press upward, and listen for the click. The priest claps. You nod politely. Brother Alric sneezes on the holy wine and calls you a heretic. Now comes the test. You must ensure the lock works before it's blessed with holy oil and declared fit to guard a saint's rib. So you lock it, then unlock it, then lock it again. You prod it, rattle it, and mumble phrases in fake Latin. It jams. You curse. It unjams. You smile. Then you drop it. It hits the ground and explodes into 5 pieces. The key breaks. The latch splinters. Your pride evaporates. Back to the drawing board. This time, you use a thicker piece of bone. You boil it first. You're not sure why, but your neighbor insists it removes the spirits. And at this point, you're willing to try anything. The boiled bone holds up better. You file it down, reshape the key, and reinforce the latch with a sliver of brass. It works. You are cautiously optimistic. Always a dangerous feeling in your line of work. Word spreads. Slowly. The baker hears about your work. Then a goose. And then a man named Ulrich, who once tried to eat a brass spoon. It's not much, but it's something. One evening, a steward arrives from a nearby manor. He needs a lock for his master's private drawer. You don't ask questions, you simply nod and name your price. He hands you a boiled egg. You accept. You shape a new lock using a thinner brass plate and a more delicate mechanism. The key is almost decorative. You test it, polish it, and install it under cover of night. The nobleman is pleased. He pays you with a pouch of dried figs and 1 silver coin. You bury the coin immediately because banks don't exist and your pockets are full of holes. Over the next week, you get more work. A merchant wants to lock his cart. A widow thinks someone's been stealing her bread. It's probably her cat, but you make her a small latch anyway. She pays you in moldy cheese and a story about her late husband's haunted boots. You're finally in business. Not a rich business, not a clean one, but enough to keep the fire going, your tools from rusting, and your belly half full. Brass is soft, easily scratched, and far from perfect. Bone is brittle, prone to snapping, but you make them work. You've learned to adapt. Your locks start to hold. People begin to trust you. The altar wine is safe. The noble's drawer is secure. Brother Alric still snores in Latin, but no one can hear him through the chapel door you reinforced last Thursday. Somewhere down the line, you might even afford real iron. But for now, your world is bone and brass, splinters and fire, keys and secrets. And that cursed cat still keeps sneaking into your workshop. You've been summoned again by holy men. Not the priest, not this time, but to build the monks a lockbox, a holy one, for relics, bones, and the occasional mysterious toenail allegedly belonging to Saint Somebody of somewhere. The monk who greets you wears a robe that smells like moldy parchment and boiled cabbage. His sandals are barely sandals. His beard is biblical. He squints at you like you've just tracked in something sinful on your boots, which, frankly, you probably have. You're a locksmith, not a miracle worker. We require a reliquary, he says, as if you were supposed to know that word. You nod slowly. You'll pretend you do? A reliquary, you've since gathered, is a fancy word for a small box where they keep dead saint bits. It needs a lock, because pilgrims steal things, and also because monks are just like nobles, just quieter and with better handwriting. He leads you through the stone corridors of the monastery, all damp and echoing, until you reach the chamber where they're storing their sacred collection. 3 cracked bones, a dirty rag, and something that might be a molar. It's spiritual if you squint. You begin sketching ideas in charcoal on the side of a bread crust, because paper is expensive, and you ate your last scrap of parchment last week out of desperation and bad judgment. This one uses a spring and a rotating tumbler, you say, showing him a crude diagram of a mechanism that would befuddle Aristotle. The monk blinks. What? He asks, staring at the circle you've drawn like it's a demon's eye. A tumbler, you say. It turns and aligns with the notches in the key, so the bolt can slide. You mime the movement with your hands. This helps absolutely no one. He nods slowly, like you're describing witchcraft. But what if someone spins it the wrong way? Does it summon something? You pause. Number it jams the lock. Ah. He narrows his eyes. So it is a punishment. No, it's mechanical, you say, already regretting everything. The next hour is spent trying to explain basic physics to a man who believes thunder is God bowling and that illness is caused by sin. You mention the word tension, and he asks if that's related to demons. You say metal fatigue, and he brings up chastity. Eventually, you just say, it keeps the bad people out, and he finally nods with understanding. Praise be. Construction takes 3 weeks because you're doing this by hand, on an anvil made from the repurposed sole of a cartwheel, and using tools that haven't been properly sharpened since King Henry was a fetus. Every hinge, latch, and mechanism has to be made from scratch. Every piece has to be exact, or it sticks, squeals, or worse, snaps. You're halfway through filing the key when Brother Clement appears behind you like a silent shadow, breathing loudly and holding a turnip. What's that? He asks, pointing at the nearly finished lock. This is the cam. You show him the part. When you turn the key, it pushes the bolt. But how does it know which key? It doesn't know, it just Listen, the teeth match the pattern in the tumbler. No match, no turn. Ah, he nods seriously, as if you've just explained the mysteries of the Eucharist. It's like divine judgment. You give up. When the reliquary is finally ready, it gleams like a miracle. Well, a small iron miracle with a slight dent because your dog knocked it off the table yesterday. You deliver it wrapped in wool, gently placed into a cart, pulled by the town's surliest mule. The monks gather around like you're unveiling the Ark of the Covenant. You open it with a theatrical flourish and turn the key. Click. Smooth as butter. There's silence, then polite clapping, the medieval equivalent of a standing ovation. Brother Clement gasps audibly. Another monk mutters something about sorcery. You take it as a compliment. And then the questions begin. What if someone copies the key? What if the devil learns to pick locks? What if the relic wants to get out? What if the tumbler tumbles the wrong way on the Sabbath? You blink. You've made a device that opens and closes a lid. Somehow, this has become theological. You try to explain key duplication, but this leads to an hour-long discussion on whether sin can be forged the same way. You mention tension wrenches, and someone brings up martyrdom. You ask if they have any bread. They give you fish. The abbot finally intervenes and thanks you, placing a pouch in your hands. Payment, at last. You peek inside. 3 coins. Silver, at least. But 3. You spent 17 days, burned through half your charcoal, and your right thumb hasn't uncramped in a week. You try to smile. You are, after all, a humble tradesman, and also very aware that criticizing a monastery gets you cursed, or worse, invited back. On your way out, you pass a group of novices trying to open the box without the key. They've already bent a fork in the process. You ride home with your tools in a bag, your dignity in fragments, and a lingering question in your mind. Why do people who live in total poverty and take vows of silence always want the most complicated locks? Still, you're proud of your work. The mechanism is good. Maybe too good. You'll probably be asked back to fix it next month when someone drops the key in the font. And when you get home, you find your apprentice has used your best file to scrape candle wax off his boot. You don't cry. You sigh. Loudly. And you go back to heating iron, shaping metal, and wondering if you could have made an easier living as a rat catcher. But no. You're a locksmith. You make small, intricate machines that no one understands and everyone blames when they break. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. The year is somewhere in the early 1100s, right when feudalism is spreading like a bad rash, and so are locked chests. Lords want to keep their gold, their food, their weapons, and their secrets under lock and key. That means one thing for you. Business is booming. Sort of. You see, locks aren't just simple clunkers anymore. No. These are intricate little iron puzzles designed to keep the unworthy out. You forge wards, levers, and tumblers with such detail that only you, or someone you train to be almost as stubborn, can open them. The good news? The demand for locks has exploded. The bad news? Every time a chest breaks open, or a door jams, or the Lord's idiot nephew gets his foot stuck trying to pick it open with a rusty dagger, it's your fault. Every single time. Let's set the scene. You're hunched over your anvil, sweat mixing with soot. the only light coming from your fire and a few flickering torches. Your hands are black with grime, and you haven't had a proper bath in what feels like a year. But you've got the next big commission, a lock for a lord's treasure chest. You hammer the iron until it's red hot, twist it into wards that look like a rat's nest of tangled twigs, and fit a key that looks like it belongs more on a giant than a human hand. Your pride swells. You're creating a tiny fortress for their valuables. But don't get too comfortable, because the moment you hand it over, you're no longer the craftsman. No, you're the first suspect. Oh, my lord's heir has lost the key again. The chest won't open. What's wrong with your lock? That's the question you hear every time the lock jams. The lord's nephew, probably drunk or throwing a tantrum, decides he can break the lock. So what does he do? He kicks it. Hard. Guess who gets called back to fix the lock? Spoiler alert, it's you. You arrive at the Lord's manor, ready to explain that you made the lock just fine. But his nephew's mule kick isn't exactly covered under your craftsmanship warranty. The Lord waves you off, clearly not wanting to hear about personal responsibility. He just wants his chest open. You wrestle with the iron, the lock now mangled and bent out of shape because some overgrown toddler thought it was a toy. It takes you hours you're not getting paid for, to restore order to chaos. And then, of course, you get the "you should be more careful next time" speech. Careful? You didn't drop it. You didn't slam it into the stone floor. You forged a masterpiece and someone treated it like a doorstop. But that's life in medieval locksmithing. Blamed for every failure, celebrated for none of the success. In the flickering torchlight of a stone corridor deep beneath the castle, iron groaned louder than the men. The air down here never changed. It clung to the skin like a cold shroud, sour with mildew and the breath of the forgotten. This was the dungeon, the dark place beneath noble feet where the lowest souls were chained and the locksmith's work lived in silence. No one thought much about the locksmith once the cell door clanked shut. No songs were written for the man who forged the fetters. No blessings were offered for the one who filed the key. But without him, the entire weight of feudal justice would buckle like a rusty hinge. Doors did not lock themselves. Chains did not grow from stone. For every imprisoned heretic, thief, or political rival, there was a locksmith, his soot-blackened hands steady, his tools clinking softly as he worked in the shadows. The locksmith's relationship with the dungeon was both practical and perilous. On the surface, it was just another commission. Make a hasp for this cell, a lock for that manacle, a key that turns once and never again. But unlike the ornate locks crafted for chests, monasteries, or city gates, dungeon locks were different. Cruder, thicker, meaner. They didn't need to be beautiful. They needed to be cruel. A lock in the dungeon wasn't a symbol of wealth or order. It was a sentence, a boundary, a warning. These locks weren't always complex, but they had to be strong. Many were just single-barreled mechanisms reinforced with thick rivets, too stubborn to be picked and too ugly to attract admiration. The locksmith made them with care, not because he was proud, but because a lock that failed in the dungeon meant more than embarrassment. It meant someone escaped. And when someone escaped, the locksmith was the first to be called. This was the part of the job no one wanted to think about. If a prisoner slipped their bonds, whether by clever hands or hidden hacksaw, the jailer faced shame. But the locksmith faced suspicion. The lord or his steward would summon him, demand to see the tools again, the design, the broken parts, if they could be recovered. Some demanded he remake the lock, as if to prove it could not be opened. Others skipped the formalities. There are records, not many, but enough, of locksmiths being imprisoned in the very dungeons they once secured. One, accused of helping a political prisoner escape, had the ironic fate of spending his final days locked in the cell he himself had constructed. Another, after a noble's treasure chest was found looted, was beaten until he named the buyer of the original lock. He hadn't sold it to a thief, only a merchant, but that didn't matter. The humiliation of a breach had to be washed in blame. Even when guilt wasn't assigned, the association with the dungeon blackened reputations. A locksmith known for working with torturers or jailers found fewer commissions among townsfolk. They didn't want their front doors to bear the same ironwork used in manacles. It felt wrong, cursed even. Some locksmiths kept a second name or alias for dungeon work. Others passed the job on to apprentices or smiths from out of town who didn't know better. And yet, the work kept coming. Every cell door needed a lock. So did every chain for ankles, every collar for the condemned, every gate within a gate that divided the dungeon into layers of misery. Secret chambers for interrogation, tunnels for discreet disposal, each demanded security. Some locks were intentionally rigged to jam if opened the wrong way. Others had false keyholes to confuse spies. A few, in castles wealthy enough, used spring-loaded bolts or trap-triggered mechanisms. These weren't common, but when requested, they turned a locksmith's hair gray from the stress of precision. Worse still were the shackles. Designing them was a strange art, both delicate and brutal. They had to be tight, but not crush bone, loose, but not slippable. Sometimes, nobles ordered cuffs made for children or women, political hostages too valuable to execute. The locksmith had no choice but to obey, even if his stomach turned. He made what he was told to make. The work didn't ask for conscience. Payment was not always fair. Dungeon commissions rarely paid well, because no one wanted to spend more coin than necessary on prisoners. After all, why waste gold locking up someone you might hang next week? Many locksmiths were paid in food, candles, or other barter items. The promise of favor with the Lord hung over them like a rusty bell, sounding often, delivering little. Yet some locksmiths came to specialize in the dungeon's peculiar demands. In cities like Paris or Milan, royal dungeons required standard locks for large numbers of cells. These locksmiths developed systems of interchangeable keys, a crude precursor to the master key. But the knowledge was dangerous. If those designs leaked, if even one prisoner turned a key in the dark, the fallout could be career-ending or life-ending. It was a lonely profession. The dungeon locksmith didn't get shop fronts or customers dropping in for chat. He worked behind doors, often beside men in hoods who asked no questions. Sometimes he forged in the early dawn before the town stirred. Other times he worked at midnight, summoned by a guard with a quiet knock. These weren't locks made in public. They were made in silence, in places where screams could not reach the sun. And yet, as the years passed, dungeon locksmiths endured. Some left scratch marks on their tools. Others carved their initials into the underside of manacles, small acts of defiance that prisoners never knew. A few quietly and at great risk, left a flaw, barely detectable, in one shackle or cell. Maybe it was mercy, maybe just fatigue. In time, the trade would change. The Renaissance would bring better materials, better tools, more sophisticated locks. But in the bowels of medieval society, long before blueprints or patents, the locksmith served in iron silence. Not as hero, not as villain. Just as the man who made sure the door stayed shut. It was also not wise to travel too far from home if you were a locksmith in the medieval world. In a time when roads were dangerous and strangers were rarely welcomed, the mere fact of your movement raised suspicion. Most people in your village were born, lived, and died within a few dozen miles of the same church steeple. Familiar faces meant safety. Unknown faces meant trouble. And if you were a man who worked with metal, keys, and locks, objects that kept people's secrets safe, you were not merely a stranger. You were a risk. Locksmiths who stayed in one place were tolerated. The village knew their name. They had worked for the local lord, repaired hinges for the priest, maybe even fitted a lockbox for the baker's flour. These men were useful, if rarely wealthy. But when a locksmith wandered, whether out of need, desperation, or ambition, his tools became a source of unease. For what was a lockpicker, if not one small step removed from a thief? It was a cruel irony. Traveling was often necessary for survival. A locksmith might find his home village too small, too poor to support more than one tradesman. He might have been squeezed out by a younger apprentice, or fallen afoul of the local guild. Perhaps he'd lost his forge in a fire. Or maybe he simply dreamed of making a better life elsewhere, as so many do. But once on the road, with his iron tools strapped to his back and soot under his nails, he became something else in the eyes of the towns he passed. Not a craftsman, but a vagrant. Not a tradesman, but a potential infiltrator. The signs were subtle at first. A gatekeeper's narrowed eyes, a hostelry that suddenly had no room, a village child running to fetch the reeve when you sat too long near the well. And then the questions came. Who sent you? Who do you know here? Who paid for your tools? Where did you learn to make locks? And worst of all, why are you really here? Because locksmiths did not only make locks, they understood how to undo them. To the common man, this knowledge felt close to witchcraft. You could unmake the heavy hasp on a lord's treasure chest, slip into a monastery's inner sanctum, free a prisoner, or become one. A locksmith had the power to unravel safety itself, and that, to a medieval mind, was unsettling. It made people watch your hands too closely, whisper about what you might be doing after dark. There were official ways to move, of course. Guilds often issued traveling permits or letters of recommendation. These could be presented at a town gate or to a local blacksmith, as proof you were a legitimate tradesman and not a cut purse in disguise. But even these letters didn't guarantee kindness. In some places, guilds were fiercely territorial. A foreign locksmith might be seen as a competitor, a poacher of customers. Some towns fined or outright banned outside metalworkers, worried they would undercut prices or steal secrets. Guild jealousy was not a small matter. In a few recorded cases, traveling locksmiths were beaten, shackled, or driven out with little warning, especially if their work was deemed too clever. For those without guild ties, the danger was even greater. Many independent locksmiths operated on the fringes. Self-taught, often descended from blacksmiths, working for coin and food where they could. they offered repairs to broken locks, mended latches, or sold simple keys to peasants who had never owned one before. But each job risked their life. If a burglary happened in a town shortly after a locksmith arrived, even if it was days later and unrelated, the blame often landed on the stranger with the key-shaped tools. Punishments could be swift. Fines, beatings, shackles. In some cases, death. In England, France, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire, traveling tradesmen could be tried under vagrancy or suspicion of larceny laws. These were vague, loosely enforced, and relied heavily on the word of local officials or accusers. If a town bailiff didn't like your face, or if a rival said you were acting strangely, you could be imprisoned with little cause. Locksmiths, sadly, were frequent victims of this. Their skill was both admired and mistrusted. To make locks was noble. To know how to open them without a key, that bordered on sorcery. Some locksmiths tried to avoid this fate by traveling only to known patrons. Wealthy lords, abbots, or merchants might write ahead on their behalf or host them inside the estate. These arrangements offered safety and food, but also came with obligations, days of tedious labor, little pay, and no freedom to choose other work. A locksmith might be asked to repair the same gate hinge a dozen times just to earn his supper, or he might be paid in kind: a jug of ale, a crust of bread, a pile of firewood. Money was rare. Gratitude, rarer still. And yet they persisted. Traveling locksmiths walked from village to village, often along the same roads used by tanners, coopers, and peddlers. Some made it their life's work. Others returned home within a season, burned out by suspicion, cold nights, and too many slammed doors. A few found places where they were finally welcomed, towns with no local smith, or monasteries eager for someone to fix their rusted chest locks. But more often than not, they were met with fear. Iron tools and unknown faces made for uneasy company. By the 14th century, some cities like Paris, Cologne, and London began regulating locksmith movement more strictly. Registration became required. Travelers had to report to guild halls or city watchmen within a day of arrival. Those who failed risked arrest. It was safer, by then, to stay put, to live quietly, make locks for the neighbors, and let the world come to you. In the end, it wasn't just the fear of bandits or the burden of walking that cursed the traveling locksmith. It was trust, an invisible wall they couldn't breach. In a world built on suspicion and locked doors, few people wanted to open one for the man who knew too well how to build or break them. You've just survived another day as a medieval locksmith, which, believe it or not, is already a feat worthy of celebration. Your hands smell like burnt iron and the oily grime of the forge. Your clothes are smudged with soot, and your back aches like you've been wrestling with a wild boar. But now comes the real challenge. You've been locked in by a lord. A local noble, to be exact, who's just demonstrated that he knows two things about locksmiths. 1, you're good at your job. 2, he doesn't respect you enough to pay you. The afternoon began like any other, the sun hanging low but warm enough to keep the chill from creeping inside your little workshop. You were shaping some tricky wards for a lock destined for the Lord's treasure chest. An intricate design you'd poured sweat and teeth into for weeks. This was the kind of work that, if you got it right, might have meant a nice meal and a few extra coins in your pouch. Instead, you got invited to the manor. Invited is putting it politely. When you arrived, the Lord greeted you with a grin sharp enough to cut steel and an idea as devious as a rat in the grain sack. "Show me your genius," he said, slapping a hefty iron chest onto the table. "And then, let's see if you can get out." You didn't realize until much later. He meant it, literally. He shut you in a dimly lit room, the only door secured with your own lock. That same complicated beast you'd just finished crafting, its wards and tumblers twisting in ways you could barely remember after working on it for so long. The Lord chuckled from the other side of the heavy oak, the sound echoing like a bad omen. "Break out by dawn," he called, "and maybe I'll see if you deserve a reward." The door slammed shut with a finality that settled deep into your bones. Now, here's the thing about medieval locksmithing. It's not just about strength or brute force. If you're lucky, it's a matter of patience, nerves, and cunning. Your fingers, thick with calluses, had to relearn your own handiwork, twisting and probing wards you yourself had dreamed up. Every click of the mechanism felt like the beating of a war drum. Fail, and you'd be a prisoner of your own craft. Success? Well, success might just earn you your freedom. And maybe a promise that was as empty as the Lord's purse. The room itself was about as comfortable as a sack of rocks. A single candle sputtered in the corner, barely illuminating the grime-coated walls and the rough wooden floor that creaked under your weight. The air smelled faintly of mold and old smoke, a mix that clung to your throat like wet cloth. No windows, of course, just a tiny gap above the door that let in the occasional rat or spider, which seemed almost polite compared to the Lord's hospitality. You crouched low, breath shallow, listening for the footsteps that you hoped wouldn't return too soon. Your tools, a few slender picks, a tension wrench, and a piece of wire you had fashioned from an old nail, felt strangely foreign in your hands. This was no ordinary lock-picking job. This was a test of pride and survival. You set to work. Every ward, every bolt, every tumbling pin was a memory you had to coax back from the deepest parts of your brain, like a bard remembering an ancient song. Your fingers moved slowly, deliberately, with the kind of precision that comes only from years of coaxing iron into submission. The lock resisted, stubborn as a mule, mocking you with its silent challenge. Hours passed. The candle burned lower. Your arms ached. Your mind raced with curses, some in Latin, most in your own native tongue, and you considered the absurdity of the situation, locked in by the very trap you had built, with no one but rats and roaches for company. The Lord was probably somewhere upstairs, sipping mead and enjoying the spectacle of a locksmith, struggling against his own handiwork. But you didn't give up. Midnight came and went. Your fingers cramped, your breath hitched. You could hear the distant hoot of an owl, the scratching of mice, and the faint murmurs of the manor settling in for the night. Outside the door, silence reigned. But inside, a storm of frustration and determination raged. You found the weak spot. Every lock has one, a subtle imperfection hidden beneath layers of crafted complexity. You pressed your pick deeper, feeling the tiniest click, then another. The tumblers shifted, the wards aligned, and suddenly, the door gave a creak. A faint sound, but the sweetest noise you'd heard all night. Freedom was within reach. You pushed harder, heart pounding, adrenaline dulling the ache in your back and hands. The door groaned, old wood straining against iron hinges, but it moved. You slipped out, blinking against the dim hallway light. Victory tasted like dust and desperation. But the Lord? He was nowhere to be seen. You found your way out of the manor, the night air cool and sharp against your skin. You smelled freedom, but no payment, no gratitude, just the lingering bitterness of being used and discarded. The next morning, you returned to your workshop, fingers still numb from the ordeal. You picked up your tools, eyeing them warily. That lock, your masterpiece, had locked you in, and the Lord had locked your pay away in his greedy pockets. Word spread quickly. You were the locksmith who broke out of his own lock, but also the one the Lord stiffed. Your reputation grew, but not quite in the way you wanted. People whispered about your skills, yes, but also about the audacity of nobles and how little respect craftsmen really got. It was a lesson in medieval life no one forgets. Your craft could save you, but your social standing might damn you. Back at the forge, as the flames danced and the iron glowed hot, you made a silent vow. Next time, you'd build a lock that even a lord couldn't cheat. But for now, you just had to survive the morning with empty pockets and a bruised ego. Welcome to being a medieval locksmith. It sucked, and somehow it was just getting started. Tomorrow came with bad news. A local thief has gotten a bit too famous for his skill at picking locks. Suddenly, you're not just the town locksmith. You're the town's reluctant hero, panic merchant, and unwilling profiteer all rolled into one. It starts with whispers in the market square. Did you hear about Gerard, the lockpicker? They say he's small, quick, and can open a chest faster than you can say, "warded lock." People begin looking at their old wooden chests and iron-bound doors the way you might eye a wolf in a sheep's clothing. You, the locksmith, used to be invisible. Now you're as popular as a pox outbreak, except this time, people actually want to see you. The townsfolk flood your shop like it's the gates of heaven. Make my lock stronger. Can you make it so no one but me can get in? Can you fix what Gerard broke? You're busier than a blacksmith on market day. And your prices, oh, your prices, skyrocket faster than a rooster's crow at dawn. Normally, you charge a modest handful of groats for a decent lock. Now, you're demanding triple, sometimes quadruple. After all, panic is profitable. But let me tell you, money doesn't erase stress. Each lock you make feels like a ticking time bomb. The whole town is watching, waiting for the next thief's strike. You're the man they come to when their treasures vanish, their secrets are exposed, or their wives' dowries are raided. Every lock you forge has to be perfect, or the blame falls squarely on your broad shoulders. The irony? Panic breeds paranoia. People who never locked anything before are suddenly experts in security. They want locks with more wards, thicker bolts, more teeth on the key. You hear endless requests for locks that can't be picked, which, if you tell them the truth, don't really exist. But you keep that little detail to yourself. After all, you're a locksmith, not a magician. Your forge roars with constant fury. The hammer on the anvil rings out like a death knell, forging lock after lock in a frantic dance of iron and fire. You barely sleep. You hardly eat. Your apprentice keeps trying to catch his breath, and you swear he's developing permanent bags under his eyes. But business is booming. Well, booming in the kind of way where your nerves fray like old rope and your hands shake as you file the wards on the locks. Meanwhile, the thief, Gerard, becomes a kind of perverse folk hero. You hear tavern tales of his exploits, how he slipped into the merchant's storeroom, how he outwitted the mayor's guards, how he opened the chest that was supposedly unpickable. He's like a shadow that mocks your craft. Every lock you make is a challenge to him. Every lock he picks is a humiliation to you. You catch yourself wondering, between grinding your files and quenching your iron, if Gerard is secretly laughing somewhere, watching you sweat over locks that will only delay him for a few precious minutes. You consider tracking him down, maybe trying to hire him, or teach him a lesson. But that's madness. The thief's game is not one you want to play, and certainly not one you want to lose. The fear in the town is palpable. People stop inviting friends over. They bolt doors with heavy iron bars, hang chains that clang like death bells every time the wind blows. You're asked to craft locks for cellars, chests, even the few safes the wealthier folk have started to hoard. And, with each request, your reputation grows, along with the weight on your shoulders. But here's the thing about rising demand in a panic. It doesn't breed gratitude. The richer folks who can afford your new, superior locks still eye you with suspicion. How do we know these locks aren't just tricks to keep us paying forever? They ask. The poorer ones curse you for hiking prices. The village council debates whether locksmiths are necessary evils or just plain nuisances. You start to notice another problem. Quality. You used to take pride in every lock you made, carefully shaping wards and fitting bolts so the key slid smoothly, locking up secrets tight. Now, you're churning out whatever will pass muster. Sometimes, you swear you see the locks you made last week already battered open like a child's toy. The panic demands quantity over quality, and your craftsmanship suffers. Your apprentice tries to remind you about pride in the craft. He tries, bless him. But the endless hammering, the constant stream of angry customers, and the gnawing fear that your next lock might be the one that fails, it wears on you. The shop smells like sweat, soot, and despair. Your fingers ache with burns and cuts you barely notice anymore. You begin to understand the true cost of panic. It's not the money. It's the slow unraveling of your soul. Sometimes, in the dark hours when the forge's fire dies low and the village sleeps, you stare at your tools and wonder if it's worth it. Are you a craftsman or a desperate man trying to keep ahead of a thief who laughs at your locks? Is your work saving the town or just feeding a never-ending cycle of fear? And yet, when the dawn breaks, the townspeople will be at your door again, clutching their chests, their storerooms, their secrets, begging for locks stronger than yesterday's. Because in a world where every wooden chest hides something precious, and every locked door can be a lifeline or a prison, you are the silent guardian, the maker of tiny iron fortresses. So you pick up your hammer again, you stoke the fire, you grind the wards sharper, and file the keys finer. Because in a world overrun by thieves and panic, the locksmith is both the hero and the haunted. And if you survive this, maybe someday someone will tell stories not about Gerard the lockpicker, but about you, the locksmith who wouldn't let the town fall into darkness. Until then, you make a living from panic, and you swear you'd rather face 100 thieves than this. Today, let's say you're not just any medieval locksmith. You're the locksmith of the Alhambra, Granada, 1375. The jewel of the Nasrid dynasty. A palace so staggeringly beautiful it makes Florence look like a muddy goat pen. Marble floors, honeycomb arches, mosaics finer than a bishop's conscience. And you, scrunched over an anvil with soot on your face, trying to make a lock no thief can open and no noble can understand. Your workshop? Tucked into a shadowy corner of the palace, beneath a staircase no one uses unless they're lost or hiding from taxes. The ceiling leaks. The forge groans like a dying ox every time you stoke it. But still, you've got a job more sacred than most priests. Because in a place with more secrets than bedrooms, somebody has to make sure all those doors stay firmly shut. Not that you get the respect. You're not a poet or a court musician. No one writes odes about the elegance of the hinge mechanism. You're the guy they remember. Exists only when something won't open. But oh, when they do remember, they send runners in the middle of the night because some noble can't find the key to his wine cellar. Again. Still, you know what you are. You're a master of iron and brass, guardian of what stays locked and what gets revealed. You don't just make locks, you make puzzles, mechanical riddles wrapped in iron skins, because this isn't some village gate latch you're building. This is Alhambra. You can't just slap on a bolt and call it a day. Every lock must be a work of art. Functional, yes, but beautiful, intricate, frustratingly clever. Take the door to the Hall of the Ambassadors, 30 feet tall, carved like an ivory dream, and behind it, secrets worth killing for. Gold, letters, maybe even blackmail material written in the Sultan's own hand. The lock? Hidden inside a wooden panel shaped like a blooming flower. You have to rotate the petals just so, and only then does the iron catch release. You spent 4 weeks designing that mechanism. And what did the steward say? Oh, good. It opens. Barbarian. Sometimes you feel like the palace is testing you. A steward comes to you in a panic because a room must be secured with a lock that only opens on Wednesdays after sunset, but before the second call to prayer. What does that even mean? Are you building a lock or orchestrating a lunar ritual? You smile. You nod. You build it anyway. Your locks aren't just about keys. Oh no. You've long since moved beyond simple warded locks. You've made sliding bolt traps, false keyholes, hidden pressure plates. One of your favorites is a chest that only unlocks when 2 separate keys are turned simultaneously. Perfect for mistrusting cousins or paranoid poets. Another is a box that plays music when opened. That one nearly got you beheaded because someone mistook the tune for a coded insult to the Sultan's mother. It wasn't. Probably. And then there's the matter of relocation. Some of the palace's most delicate treasures, jewels, scrolls, secrets of state, aren't hidden behind doors at all. They're stashed inside moving walls and swiveling columns. You're the one they call when a new hiding place must be carved into ancient stone. You pretend your joints don't hurt. You pretend your eyes aren't failing from years of squinting at brass pins and gear teeth. You nod again. And then you make something so diabolical, so utterly baffling, that even you have to write down instructions for future you. Except, let's be honest, future you never remembers where you hid the instructions. And the worst part? No one is supposed to see your work. If people are noticing your lock, something's gone wrong. It means someone's trying to break in, or worse, trying to break out. You remember the first time a noble's mistress got stuck in a hidden room behind a tapestry. Your mechanism worked perfectly, too perfectly. It took 3 guards, 2 hours, and your left thumbnail to get her out. No one thanked you. The steward even accused you of sorcery-level over-engineering. You took that as a compliment. And yet, despite the panic, the paranoia, the midnight emergencies, you keep forging, you keep refining, because every lock is a question, and every thief thinks they're the answer. Your job is to stay one move ahead, to make sure that no matter how clever the intruder, the lock remains a whisper louder. Sometimes you wonder about the future. Will anyone remember the locksmith of the Alhambra? Will they see your work centuries from now and understand the brilliance, the beauty, the absurd stress of trying to create mechanical poetry in an era where half the court thinks gears are witchcraft? Probably not. They'll write books about the architects, the poets, maybe even the guy who cleaned the fountains, but not you. Still, in some hidden chamber, buried under dust and time, there's a lock only you could have made. Maybe it guards a secret no one remembers. Maybe it guards nothing at all. But it's there, silent, patient, waiting. And when some future soul finds it, stares at it, turns it over in their hand and says, "Whoever built this was a genius," you'll take that, because you were. And your hands may be blistered, your back may creak like a siege tower, and no one ever invites you to dinner. But you are the locksmith of the Alhambra, and nothing opens unless you say so. Now, you're not in Europe anymore. This isn't your freezing little workshop where the roof leaks and the neighbors gossip. This is the court of the Artukid kings in Diyarbakir, in what is now southeastern Turkey. The year is 1200, and your brain is about to hurt. Because here walks a man who isn't just a blacksmith, not just a tinkerer, not just some village hammer swinger who sharpens plows and occasionally builds a door latch. No, Al-Jazari is a full-blown mechanical wizard, a polymath, an engineer, artist, and philosopher who somehow turns metal and water into magic. And you're not even worthy to oil his gears. Let's get something straight. This man did not invent your average lock and key. He didn't spend his life hammering iron bolts for drunk nobles or replacing hinges kicked in by thieves. He was the kind of man who looked at a river and thought, you know what would be cool? If this powered a robot that served drinks. And then he built it. His greatest work? A book with a title so long and ornate, it sounds like a spell. The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. But don't let the poetic name fool you. This thing is a 13th century tech manual from a future that hadn't happened yet. In it, he describes over 50 mechanical inventions, water clocks that chime and move, musical automata with programmable drumming patterns, elephant-shaped timepieces that drip water with celestial precision, and, yes, locks. Not just any locks. We're talking sophisticated, multi-part locking mechanisms with internal gears, counterweights, hidden triggers, and even early versions of combination locks. Combination locks. In the year 1200. While the rest of the medieval world was still stuffing iron bars into wooden doors and calling it security, Al-Jazari was inventing systems that required sequences of motion and timing. Secret compartments? Traps that opened only if you knew the method. Locks designed not just to secure, but to baffle. He wasn't keeping you out with brute force. He was outthinking you. And here's the kicker. He documented everything, with diagrams, instructions, notes, all written by candlelight in a court where kings waited eagerly for his next absurd marvel. He wasn't just building gadgets. He was leaving behind a blueprint for how to think differently about machines. Fast forward a century or two, and European locksmiths are still chiseling crude wards into iron and pretending it's art. Meanwhile, rumors filter in from travelers. Tales of Eastern geniuses who made machines that pour wine and fountains that respond to motion. Pilgrims bring back trinkets from the Islamic world. Scholars hoard translated manuscripts. And somewhere, probably in a dusty Italian workshop or a French monastery cellar, a curious mind reads about Al-Jazari's combination lock and has a revelation. Security doesn't have to be heavy. It can be clever. And so slowly, the influence leaks in, through trade routes, through manuscripts, through whispers. Europe doesn't even know it, but it's about to undergo a quiet revolution in mechanical design. And it starts with a man who lived and died hundreds of leagues away, designing wonders for a king who liked his automata lifelike and his clocks philosophical. What made Al-Jazari different wasn't just that he made things work. It's that he made them beautiful, multifunctional, and, above all, deceptively intelligent. His locks weren't just obstacles, they were puzzles. His water clocks didn't just tell time, they told stories with moving figures, shifting colors, and synchronized motion. He once designed a locking mechanism that involved 4 levers, a weighted float, and a camshaft, just to open a simple basin. Why? Because he could. Now imagine being a European locksmith 200 years later, struggling to file a proper key for a petty noble's wine cellar, and someone shows you a sketch from Al-Jazari's book. You'd either quit on the spot or spend the rest of your life trying to replicate it. Of course, Al-Jazari never called himself a locksmith. That would have been like calling Leonardo da Vinci a sketch artist. But his influence? Unmistakable. His thinking? Centuries ahead. And his legacy? Buried in the gears and springs of every clever lock that came after him. Back in your dusty medieval shop, with your iron keys and soot-stained tunic, you think you're clever because you invented a lock that jams after 3 uses. Meanwhile, this man built a robot butler that could pour tea. You're not even in the same league. You're a hammer in a world of clockwork. And here's the irony. Al-Jazari didn't invent machines for fame or war. He built them for delight, for curiosity, for kings who wanted to impress visiting diplomats with dancing birds and peacock fountains. But those inventions did more than entertain. They rewired the way people thought about motion, control, and hidden mechanisms. And that That was the true lock he picked, the one inside the human mind. So next time you're sitting at your forge, grinding out another iron hasp for a barn door that's going to rot in 2 winters, remember? Once, long ago, a man stared at the stars, dipped his quill in ink, and sketched the future. With levers, weights, and wonder. And you'll never catch up. It's late, it's raining, and the wind is howling like the devil's hounds got loose in the village again. You were just trying to deliver a letter. That's it. One lousy scroll, tied with twine and sealed with red wax that smells suspiciously like blood and rosemary. You were told it was for a Dr. Faust. Should be simple. Walk to the edge of the woods, find the crumbling stone house that everyone avoids, knock twice, don't make eye contact, and leave before your soul starts itching. But now, you're here, and something's off. For starters, the door isn't locked. No bolt, no bar, no iron latch, just a wide slab of oak cracked open like it's been waiting for someone stupid, which, lucky you, turns out to be exactly your job description. You step inside and immediately regret it. The air is thick with incense, burnt parchment, and the unmistakable odor of singed beard. There are books everywhere, stacked in piles, hanging from the ceiling by rope, shoved between broken wine jugs and greasy gears that tick and twitch on their own. Candles burn upside down. There's a raven staring at you from the rafters. You swear it nods, and then you see him. Dr. Faust. He's bent over a desk covered in iron parts and twisted springs. His robe is stained with something dark and crusty, and not in the helpful herbalist way. He's muttering to himself in Latin, or maybe it's just German after 4 goblets of mead. And in his hands, not a pen, not a crucifix, but a lock. An enormous, beautiful, absolutely unnecessary iron lock that looks more complicated than a bishop's confession. You clear your throat. He doesn't look up. The door was meant to keep them out, not you. He says, like you're late to a meeting you never agreed to attend. You're about to apologize, maybe offer to come back when he's not mid-madness, when he picks up a pin, slips it into the keyhole, and with the flick of his wrist, the lock sings open. No key. Just knowing hands. You're staring. You know you are, because locks don't just fall open like that. That's not normal. That's witchcraft. And Faust, bless his cursed little heart, knows it. People think I made a deal with the devil, he says, finally turning toward you. His eyes are sharp, the kind that see too much and blink too little. But the devil's only interested in shortcuts. I prefer mechanisms. You nod like that makes sense. It does not. Your brain is busy trying to decide if this is the part where you run or the part where you get cursed into a toad. Faust gestures toward a wall filled with locks, some rusted, some gleaming, some clearly stolen off cathedral doors. Locks are language, he says. Every bolt is a sentence, every tumbler a lie. Pick the right one and you hear the truth. Which is poetic and terrifying, because rumor in town says Faust has a key to every door that matters. The bishop's reliquary, the apothecary's poison shelf, even the mayor's private wine cellar. No one knows how. No one dares ask. But locks stop working when he's near. Doors open. Secrets spill. People vanish. You realize now, you were never just delivering a letter. You were being tested, watched, measured like a spring against a scale. And Faust master of forbidden doors, is wondering if you might be useful. He waves you over. Tell me, what would you keep locked away if no one could open it but you? You panic. You say something stupid, like, "My goat." Faust does not laugh. He writes it down. Behind him, a cabinet clicks open by itself. Inside, you see scrolls wrapped in chains and jars labeled in languages older than dirt. There's a glint of gold, a whisper, a gear turning with no hands. Faust leans in. There are locks that open to blood, locks that count time, locks that only respond to music. I've made them all. I've broken them all. You know what scares me? You shake your head. Locks with no key, he says, because that means someone wasn't trying to keep things safe. They were trying to forget. You finally speak. And what's behind those locks? Faust smiles, slow and terrible. Usually, something still alive. The candle next to you flickers blue. He turns back to his desk, dismissing you like a stable boy who brought the wrong horse. But then, without looking, he says, "You may leave the letter. But if you ever want to understand locks, come back when the moon's full, and don't bring a priest." You drop the scroll and bolt for the door, not entirely convinced it will let you leave. Outside, the wind has stopped. The night is too quiet. Even the bugs are holding their breath. You run anyway. Back in the village, no one believes you. The blacksmith scoffs. The friar makes the sign of the cross. The tavern keeper says Faust's been dead for years. But the baker's wife looks up sharply when you mention the lock that opened without a key. She says nothing. But later, you notice her door now has 3 new bolts on it. You don't go back to Faust's house. Not during a full moon. Not during a famine. Not even when your cousin drops a ring down the well and swears there's something with fingers living down there. But you do start carrying a pin in your sleeve, just in case. And sometimes, late at night, you swear you can hear a lock clicking open all by itself. Now, you've just been hired by one of the most powerful forces in medieval Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League. Sounds fancy, right? Like you're going to spend your days sipping spiced wine on a balcony in Lübeck, while rich merchants throw silver at your feet and whisper, "Oh, Master Locksmith, protect our cargo of Baltic herring and overpriced nutmeg." Wrong. You're in a cold, damp workshop that smells like hot iron, stale beer, and disappointment. Your hands are permanently stained with soot. Your fingernails are half gone. Your back has the posture of a question mark. Because when the League says we need a locksmith, what they really mean is we need a security system, a blacksmith, a problem solver, and possibly a scapegoat if anything gets stolen. You're not just a craftsman. You're the last line of defense between someone's stack of wax-sealed trade contracts and a knife-wielding sailor with a grudge. Let's start with the basics. What even is the Hanseatic League? Think of it like an early Germanic version of Amazon. But instead of next-day delivery, it's next harvest if the ice melts delivery. Instead of customer reviews, they have axe fights. It's a sprawling network of merchant cities, like Hamburg, Riga, and Bruges, all glued together by trade, politics, and paranoia. They move goods by ship, caravan, and occasional bribe, and they need locks. Lots of locks. You don't make locks for peasants. You make locks for chests full of spice, ledgers full of lies, and warehouses stacked with grain so valuable it's guarded like gold. You make vaults that only open with keys the size of swords, mechanisms with false levers, hidden tumblers, and traps that will absolutely smash someone's fingers if they try to jimmy them open. You are, in essence, the medieval equivalent of a security consultant. And that sounds cool, until you realize it also means if something does go missing. If, say, a particularly clever thief bribes a guard and sneaks out of the docks with 200 pounds of dried fish and a chest of silver, your neck is the first one on the block. Not metaphorically, literally. These are merchants who fought wars over lost shipping crates. They will absolutely assume it was the locksmith's fault. So you triple-check your work. Then you triple-check the triple-check. Every hinge is reinforced, every rivet burned in place, every key is filed in secret and never replicated. You stop trusting your own apprentices. You sleep with your tools. You grow paranoid that even pigeons might be spying on you. Welcome to the mental health journey of a medieval locksmith. But it's not all iron filings and ulcer-inducing stress. You're a member of the guild, which, in medieval terms, means you belong to an exclusive club of equally paranoid workaholics. The guild regulates everything: prices, quality, apprenticeships, even the size and shape of your damn locks. They're like a union, if unions had more candles and fewer labor rights. Guild meetings are something. Imagine 20 soot-streaked men arguing about whether a chest lock should require 2 turns of the key or 3, while drinking heavily and accusing each other of sabotage. The guild records, if they even survive, show fines for shoddy work, rivalries, secret techniques, and occasionally a fistfight over inappropriate key duplication. You're not just crafting metal. You're surviving a political minefield made of iron and ego. Sometimes you get commissioned for the really high-value stuff. You're called to design the main door to the city grain warehouse, or the vault in the merchant guild hall, or the triple-barred treasure chest that holds the League's emergency funds, usually locked so tight even the mayor doesn't know how to open it. You feel proud until the third official in a month says, "Make it more complicated. I want something only I can open." You do. Then they lose the key. And now you're stuck trying to break into your own design while a sweaty, red-faced bureaucrat hovers behind you shouting, "Hurry up, man!" Oh, and travel? You don't just sit in one city. No, the League moves you around. One day you're in Lübeck building a lock for a warehouse full of beeswax. The next, you're on a barge to Gdansk because someone decided you need to inspect their failing door bolts before the next spice caravan arrives. There's no holiday pay, just damp boats, suspicious guards, and questions like, "Did you bring your own anvil?" Let's not forget the fun part: espionage. Because yes, even in the 14th century, people are trying to steal trade secrets. Literally. Sometimes your job is not just building locks. It's not telling people how you built them. You get threatened, bribed, and once propositioned by a very charming rogue who offered you 5 coins and a night of unforgettable lock-picking. You declined. But you still think about that compliment sometimes. Worst of all, nobody respects locksmiths. "Oh, you make keys?" they say, like it's child's play, as if you haven't spent weeks crafting a 9-lever warded lock that can survive a battering ram. a pickaxe, and 3 disgruntled dock workers, as if your work isn't the reason their entire warehouse hasn't been emptied by a single determined rat-faced burglar named Jan. You know January. Everyone knows January. He's not your fault, but you still hear your name whispered whenever he strikes. And heaven forbid you make a mistake. One day, you build a lock too well. A shipmaster stores contracts in a reinforced sea chest, then promptly loses the key overboard. Now he wants you to fix it. On the dock, in the rain, while everyone watches. You have to chisel it open, trying to look like a professional and not a wet rodent smashing his own invention with a hammer. You open it, they cheer. Then they don't pay you. But despite everything, the stress, the politics, the back pain that's now a personality trait, you keep at it. Because there's something satisfying in the click, the final turn of the key, the weight of the metal, the knowledge that you, yes, you, made a thing that will outlast you, outwit a thief, and maybe, just maybe, earn a smidge of grudging respect from the merchant class. Just don't lose your keys. They'll never let you live it down. Now, you traveled back to the 10th century. The good news? You're in England and it's not raining right now. The bad news? You're in Glastonbury, which smells like a cow burped in a wet church. And your job is being the apprentice to a monk who also happens to be a blacksmith, a scribe, a harpist, and, just for fun, a future saint. His name? Dunstan. Yes, that's St. Dunstan. The one the monks whisper about. The one the devil apparently fears. And this is the day he earns that reputation. You've spent the last 6 months sweeping soot from the forge floor, scrubbing ink off his robes, and trying not to die of boredom while he tunes a harp during Vespers. But today's different. Today, the forge is alive. Dunstan's sleeves are rolled up. His hands are black with soot and metal shavings. The air smells like iron and sweat and just a whiff of sanctity. He's hammering something unholy out of a block of pure determination. You ask what he's making. He grunts. Tongs. You nod. You've seen tongs. But these aren't normal ones. These are big, sharp, menacing. They're the sort of tongs you'd use to pull the teeth out of a giant. You don't question it. Not aloud, anyway. Now, here's what the monks won't write in the Holy Scrolls. Dunstan was not your average monk. He had a temper like a kicked mule, the patience of a cat in a bathtub, and a brain so sharp it could shear wool. He'd been banished from court for being too honest, too blunt, really, because when the queen was having an affair, Dunstan didn't look the other way. He looked directly at it, took notes, and then quoted the Bible at her during breakfast. Naturally, he made enemies. That's when he came back to Glastonbury and started doing God's work with an anvil. You're watching him heat the tongs when the air suddenly changes. The forge grows colder, even though the fire's still glowing hot. The shadows stretch. The chickens outside stop clucking. You look around and realize you're not alone. A stranger enters the workshop. He's tall, well-dressed, smells expensive. His beard is sharp, his eyes sharp, his smile sharper. He says he needs a horseshoe fixed, but the horse is nowhere to be seen. Suspicious, yes. But you're just the apprentice. You say nothing. Dunstan looks up, doesn't blink, doesn't flinch. He smiles, a slow, dangerous smile. "Of course," he says. "Leave the shoe. I'll tend to it shortly." The man nods, but he doesn't leave. He lingers, watching, pacing, asking odd questions about heaven and hell and temptation. That's when Dunstan reaches into the coals, pulls out the red-hot tongs, and, without warning, clamps them around the stranger's nose. What happens next is difficult to describe and absolutely unforgettable. The man screams. Not in the way a person screams, but in the way something ancient and wrong screams, like the sound of a cathedral cracking in half. Smoke rises from his face. The smell is terrible. You gag. Dunstan holds firm. "Reveal yourself," he growls, "or I'll grip tighter." And that's when it happens. The stranger's fine robes flicker into smoke, replaced by black fur, cloven hooves, and a tail. His face warps into something older than sin, something red and steaming and furious. You're staring at the devil himself. Dunstan doesn't blink, just squeezes harder. "You've no business here, Lucifer," he says. "Be gone." Now, you'd think the devil would laugh, maybe snap his fingers and vanish in a puff of brimstone. But no. The devil bargains. He squeals and pleads and promises gold, women, power, revenge on Dunstan's enemies. But Dunstan just leans in closer and says very calmly, "I already have the only thing I need, a purpose." The devil howls. There's a bang like thunder, and suddenly, he's gone. Smoke curls in the forge. The tongs, still clutched in Dunstan's hand, glow faintly, as if remembering the heat of hellfire. You sit there, stunned. Dunstan calmly returns to his forge, like he didn't just pinch Satan on the nose like a naughty child. He picks up the horseshoe. "Better get this done," he mutters. Real or not, the beast had crooked hooves. You never look at him the same way again. Now here's where history and legend get blurry. According to the records, Dunstan went on to become the Archbishop of Canterbury. He reformed the English Church. He taught monks to live with discipline. He created illuminated manuscripts, played music, and possibly invented early tools. But the tale of him grabbing the devil by the nose? That's the one people remember. It made its way into paintings, stained glass, even pub signs. Blacksmiths and locksmiths alike adopted Dunstan as a kind of unofficial patron saint. After all, he proved that a hot forge and a pair of good tongs could hold off the devil himself, which, in medieval terms, was basically OSHA certification. So if you were a blacksmith in the Middle Ages, you kept a little icon of Dunstan near the anvil. If you were a locksmith, you said his name under your breath when filing a stubborn key. And if you were just a humble apprentice like you, sweeping the forge floor while saints wrestled demons, you hoped one day you'd be half as bold. And maybe, just maybe, you started keeping a pair of tongs close by, just in case. Because in a world full of darkness, war, plague, and very literal demons, sometimes the only thing standing between you and hell was a monk with a hammer. And the sheer audacity to tell the devil no. In the soot-darkened corners of a 13th century workshop, lit by the flicker of a dying tallow candle, there existed a manuscript few ever saw and even fewer understood. Bound in rough leather and tucked beneath a loose floorboard behind an anvil, this hand-written book held the closest thing medieval Europe had to a locksmith's forbidden gospel. It had no title, no author, no flourish of ownership, just pages of smudged ink, iron dust, and quietly radical knowledge. It was not a holy text, though one might argue it came close in reverence, especially to the black-fingered artisans who dealt in locks and keys. Its creator, long forgotten by name but not by influence, was a locksmith whose mind walked the line between security and subversion. And in a time when privacy was rare and protection rarer still, that made him dangerous. The manuscript was a revelation. It described, in technical but practical terms, how to construct the standard warded locks of the time, those medieval mechanisms full of metal obstructions, or wards, designed to reject any key not perfectly shaped. These locks weren't delicate, but they were reliable. Churches used them to guard relics, nobles to secure coin chests, and guilds to lock away trade secrets. The writing went beyond just describing how to craft a secure lock. It also detailed, with almost unnerving calmness, how to pick the very locks it instructed you to build. With bent wires, thin slivers of metal, or reshaped tools, the anonymous author explained how to manipulate tumblers and wards, bypass mechanisms, and gently coax open doors that were supposed to remain shut. This was not common knowledge. In a world where trades were fiercely guarded and passed down by hand, eye, and apprenticeship alone, putting such detail to parchment was nearly heretical. Yet, the manuscript existed, hidden, hoarded, and likely copied in secret by those few bold enough to value utility over discretion. On one page, there was a small drawing of a warded lock split open like a chestnut, annotated with notes in cramped Latin and early French. Beneath it, a scrawl in the margin read, "A lock does not protect. A lock delays." It wasn't merely a technical document. It was a philosophy, an admission that no matter how strong the iron or how intricate the warding, every lock could be opened with time, skill, and nerve. The writer's tone was clinical, not criminal. He, or she, though unlikely given the trade's structure, was clearly a craftsman first. The manuscript described testing methods that involved timing oneself while opening locks in various lighting conditions, as well as adapting to panic situations, likely in response to theft or surveillance. In short, this wasn't a thief's handbook. It was the work of a meticulous artisan who understood that knowledge of failure was essential to mastery. This individual wasn't breaking into houses for coin. They were breaking into their own locks to understand how to make them better. That duality, creation and intrusion, defined the early world of locksmithing in the Middle Ages. Craftsmen had to understand both defense and offense. A good locksmith needed to be a student of fear of theft, of betrayal, of loss. And in the margins of this anonymous book, that fear was apparent. One line noted the typical failure points in cheap locks used by traveling merchants, along with an unsparing comment. Most fear losing the key, but they should fear the man with no need for one. This was centuries before mechanical safes, before combination dials, before mass-produced keys. At this time, a locksmith was closer to a sorcerer than a technician, summoned when wealth needed hiding or secrets needed sealing. The very existence of the manuscript suggests a secretive culture of internal critique. The guilds of locksmiths, which would later formalize in the 14th and 15th centuries, had not yet taken full shape during the presumed time of this document's origin. But the seeds were there. Locksmiths were beginning to be recognized not just as blacksmiths with smaller hammers, but as engineers in their own right. They worked with precision, often by candlelight, carving teeth into iron keys and aligning internal tumblers to perfection. Their work protected abbey doors, sealed reliquaries, and occasionally concealed the illicit or heretical. It's no wonder, then, that a few felt the need to record their knowledge, even if they dared not sign it. One particularly fascinating aspect of the manuscript is that it doesn't shy away from pointing out the flaws in even the best designs. Where some might boast of innovation, the anonymous locksmith critiques it. To add more wards is not to add more security, the manuscript claims on one page. It is to complicate the key and blind the mind. In another, it advises against over-dependence on locks altogether, suggesting instead that physical placement, high doors, hidden compartments, misleading handles, often offered more real-world protection than any number of metal barriers. In this way, the author was not only a locksmith, but also a primitive security strategist, centuries ahead of modern home defense theory. What happened to this locksmith remains a mystery. Perhaps he passed his secrets to a select few apprentices. Perhaps his work was buried, banned, or burned. Some fragments of similar design notes have surfaced in French and German archives, particularly within museum collections or preserved guild documents. Historians have found incomplete diagrams in ecclesiastical records, often attached to payments made for complex locking mechanisms for cathedral treasuries or monastic libraries. Whether these were inspired by the anonymous manual or merely parallel inventions is impossible to say. But the legacy endures, not in the form of a name carved in stone, but in the evolution of locksmithing itself. The modern warded lock is now mostly ceremonial, outdated by more advanced mechanisms, but the thinking behind it, the interplay between making and breaking, endures in every security designer, every cryptographer, every locksmith who still tests their own locks before handing them over. It's easy to dismiss the anonymous writer of this manual as a footnote in mechanical history, but in truth, they were part engineer, part philosopher, part saboteur. Their silence, intentional or imposed, only adds to the mystique. After all, anyone can build a lock, but it takes a different kind of mind to write a guide on breaking your own work and have it survive for 800 years. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep, and if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.